Hey guys, this is Natalie Pierre from AL.com. I cover college football. In about 5 minutes, we're going to have a chat about the Final Four with some of the beat writers that cover the teams participating. So if you hold on about 5 minutes, you can get some questions ready for us, and we will look forward to having about a 30-minute conversation with you guys. Okay, now that we're all here, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm Natalie Pierre from AL.com, college football reporter, covering the number 3 ranked Seminoles this season for AL.com. I am joined by beat writers from Cleveland.com, OregonLive.com, and our own AL.com. We have Drew Champlin, who covers Alabama for us. We have Andrew Greif, who covers the Ducks for Oregon Live. And we also have Ari Wasserman. I'm sorry, Ari, if I ruined that for you. Who covers Ohio State for Cleveland.com. And we'll be here with you for about 30 minutes answering any questions you guys have about the inaugural college football playoffs. So first, we'll start with, number 1. And we'll start with you, Drew. Just 3 things that we need to know about this Alabama team as they prepare to play an Ohio State team that kind of, is entering a game with a quarterback that there's really no film on.
3 things. You look at Alabama's quarterback situation, it's been pretty solid throughout the course of the season when nobody thought it would be. Blake Sims has really had a great season under Lane Kiffin, and the offense itself is, I think it's ranked 15th nationally in yards per game. They're generally, I'd say, as healthy as they could be going into the game. There are some nicks and bruises, like with T.J. Yeldon, the running back. But other than that, they're pretty healthy. And defensively, the front seven's been really good. The secondary's had its struggles, except for Landon Collins, and Cyrus Jones, a corner. But defensively, the front seven's been pretty solid.
All right, we'll move on to you, Andrew. Tell us a couple things about Oregon.
So I think that even if you're a casual observer of Oregon this year, you probably know that Oregon's been really banged up, injured all the time, and arguably the worst injury just happened. Ifo Ekpere-Olumu, who's an All-American cornerback, consensus All-American, and he tore his ACL in a knee during practice, non-contact last week. And that's a big deal considering you got guys like Rashad Green from Florida State, who, burners along the edge. Oregon's defense is pretty good. It's been playing better, but the injury to Ifo is by far probably the worst timing you could have. And that goes on to they had about 7 starters injured in the Pac-12 title game, and yet still won 51-13. The other thing is the quarterbacks. We're all talking about quarterbacks. I mean, Marcus Mariota, despite all that chaos, he's the guy holding it all together. Pretty much, even if you put him behind Oregon's 9th or 10th different offensive line unit this year, he's still going to find a way to make a play. And that's probably the most remarkable thing for me is how consistent he's been when everything around him's been changing. And then I think the defense is the other thing because they've been playing really well the last month. They had kind of a tumultuous first 6 weeks. A lot of people were calling for Don Pelham's head in the fan base, saying the new defensive coordinator didn't have what it took. But that unit has really improved, and they had, I think, famously against Arizona in the Pac-12 title game, in the first half, Arizona ran 25 plays, and they got 25 yards. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how the momentum goes with Ifo out.
Yeah, and just kind of playing off of what you were saying with the Seminoles, I think that, they haven't been healthy either, and a lot of people, they've had offensive line changes, and they had the only guy that was new on their offensive line was they had to replace the best center, arguably in the country, and Brian Stork, who now plays for the Patriots. Their guy that gets hurt, and they end up after the Miami game having to make some changes along that offensive line. The run game has really improved for Florida State. And then you look at, I know a lot of people, when they look at Jameis Winston, he hasn't statistically had a pretty season, but obviously he's 26-0 as a quarterback. I think when you look at the 17 interceptions he has, Jimbo Fisher has said that 70% of those interceptions were probably because of other things that weren't solely because of bad throws by Jameis. And so I think a lot of that was because other than Rashad Green and Nick O'Leary, as you mentioned, Rashad Green being senior star wide receiver, and then Nick O'Leary being, a star tight end and maybe the best tight end in the country, I think that, going into this game, it was youth around them. And so you saw that, besides those two, if guys could cover those two, you saw Jameis maybe force the ball to those two when they were in double coverage. With Ifo out, I think I'm curious to see how some of those young guys step up and kind of how Oregon's able to, contain Jameis Winston and in that passing game. And we'll go to, since I, butchered your last name, Ari, we'll go to you last. A few things about Ohio State.
Well, the first thing that everybody needs to understand is that Ohio State is now on their third quarterback and somehow extraordinarily won 59-0 in the Big Ten title game with Cardale Jones, who never, in my opinion, was ever going to see the field. But, it changed when JT went down after Braxton went down. So the most curious thing that I think everybody that follows Ohio State is here to see is the way Ohio State's built its roster under Urban Meyer and the way that they've been able to recruit top talent, whether or not they can compete with the deepest, most talented team in the country without their two Heisman Trophy contender quarterbacks. So do they have a roster? Do they have a running back? Do they have an offensive line? Do they have a secondary that can contain Amari Cooper? There's so many questions, and really, if Ohio State has a chance to compete in this game, it's going to be based on whether or not the players around Cardale Jones on both sides of the ball can lift him up and put Ohio State in a situation where they have a chance to win the game in the fourth quarter. So injuries aside, I think that Ohio State's got a solid offense. They've got some good wide receivers who all kind of have their own niches in the offense. They have an H-back in Jalen Marshall who does a lot of different things. The running back Ezekiel Elliott has played about as best he's played in his career the last 3 weeks. And then the defense is just going to have to step up. That defensive line, everybody knows about Joey Bosa and the plays that he makes and, the linebackers and whatnot. It's just going to be a tough challenge all around in Ohio State. And I wrote this today. This is the first time in the Urban Meyer era that Ohio State's going to be facing a team that has more or at least equally, if not more, talent on their roster than Ohio State does. So a lot of challenges and a lot of things Ohio State's going to face that they haven't seen so far.
I think of the four teams, Ohio State is probably the team that people would be most shocked if they won, this semifinal game. That being said, I know this is probably the easier argument because Alabama is number one. But Drew, what would be your argument? Having been there and covered this team all season, what would be your argument for Alabama beating Ohio State? We'll say big, because I think we could all come up with an argument for them winning the game.
Yeah. If you're going to ask them about if they're going to beat them big, you could say that it's still Ohio State's third-string quarterback. I know they did really well against Wisconsin, but I don't think Wisconsin would be up to the level talent-wise that Alabama had. So, they do only have about a game and a half of game film, but so that could work to either advantage. Ohio State can say there is only a game and a half, and they have to scout Cardale Jones, and maybe there's a lot more left in the tank that they did not show against Wisconsin. But from Alabama's side, they could still look at it as a green quarterback who hasn't faced a lot of live action and throw a lot of things he hasn't seen. And also from Alabama's side, they have Amari Cooper, and I was just reading on Cleveland.com a story about how Ohio State couldn't handle Sammy Watkins a couple of years ago. I believe it was in the Orange Bowl. Will Alabama be able to do that with Amari Cooper? Have a big double-digit catch, 200-yard game. They've been able to do that several times this year, so I think they're gonna get it to Cooper a lot. They're gonna give him a chance to make some big plays, and no one's really been able to stop him just yet. And the teams that have neutralized him, you've had guys like DeAndre White step up. So. Yeah, that's about pretty much what I would say there. And
Ari, what would be your case for Ohio State to actually knock off Alabama and win this game and move on to the championship?
It's a tough case to make if you're a 10-point underdog, but it happens a lot in college football. The thing with Ohio State that I'll say, and I've been kind of negative all year. I've picked against them. I picked against them in the Virginia Tech game. They lost. I picked against them against Michigan State. And I picked against them in the Wisconsin game, and they ended up proving me wrong 2 out of the last 3 times. So, a lot of things that I think are going to play into this game more so than the quarterback is how finally, after the infusion of 3 top 5 recruiting classes, is the talent going to be there all around across the board. And even though there's a lot of SEC dominance and a lot of things about how the Ohio State has recruited neck and neck with Alabama. And to me, they might be the most talented team that Alabama's faced all year. So depending on if everything can come together and do the right thing, the intangibles on this side of the equation are unspeakable. The idea that they want to show that they're capable of competing with a team like Alabama, the talent they put together, the idea that the SEC is superior. Ohio State has a lot of turmoil going on in the program in terms of the loss of a football player a few weeks ago, and it just seems to me that a lot of people have picked against them all year, including myself, and they've kind of improved and proved people wrong. And the 59-0 win over Wisconsin was just a perfect example of it. So, I think Alabama is clearly the favorite in this game, but at the same time, it's possible that Ohio State has more talent than Alabama's faced all year too. And I know Alabama hasn't always, handled teams like Ohio State that well, so there could be a chance for Ohio State to win the game.
Since Ari's trying to convince himself as he talks, help him out, Drew. Looking at the Alabama team, what are some weaknesses you see in the Alabama team that could potentially play into Ohio State's favor in this game?
Well, they haven't had much recent success in the Sugar Bowl. Last year against Oklahoma and a few years ago against Utah. They did beat LSU for the national championship in the Superdome, but that was last year or several years ago. Alabama's been really susceptible to the deep balls, and Cardale Jones has a pretty good arm. So you saw Auburn burn them deep, burn the cornerbacks deep a couple of times for touchdowns. Ohio State connected on a couple of deep balls. When Matty Ball was able to escape some pressure and find a receiver streaking past the secondary for a big game, and then Alabama held him in the red zone. I would say that's been a problem. They've given up a lot more bigger plays or 15-plus yard plays this season than they have in the past. So, that could be a problem. And, like Ari said, Ohio State's got a lot of talent, and I wonder. I don't think Alabama's they're certainly not overlooking it, but do they maybe think that Ohio State might not be as good as they really are because they're not in the SEC, and that's going to be a big thing to see. How talented is Ohio State? How are they going to look against Alabama? And I think it's going to be still be a close game. You never know. You never know what could happen in stuff like this. But weaknesses goes. I think definitely Alabama's got to limit the big plays.
On the other side, looking at the Rose Bowl, Andrew, what is it? If you had to convince me that Oregon is going to win this game and move on to the national championship game, obviously they have the Heisman Trophy winner at quarterback, but what are you selling me on? Why do you feel like they're going to, or maybe not personally, but why do you feel like fans should feel like they can win this game against Florida State?
They have this crazy resiliency going on right now that I kind of stressed it in the opening bit, but no matter kind of what you throw at them, they've been really good about bouncing back and winning. Their only loss was because they had their best left tackle gone along with a couple other tackles who'd been hurt. Marcus Mariota wasn't at his best, and you really have to have kind of a perfect storm, it seems like, if you want to beat Oregon. And Florida State certainly is talented enough and capable enough to do that by all means, but Oregon, I just don't doubt their confidence right now. And I know that's not kind of the most concrete thing you can rest a case on, but they are very, very good about kind of taking a punch and rolling with it. That's why the Ifo Ekpre-Olomu injury is something I'm really going to be interested to watch, how they respond to that, because the defensive backs, like the offense, are very confident even if they've been hit. I think it all starts with Marcus Mariota. I mean, he's just a playmaker every single year, whether it's kind of against Michigan State when they were down by double digits and he had a kind of a famous scoop pass on third down that got him out of that situation. There's always a play that he makes. And not only, so he's been the constant all year, but around him as the year has gone on, I think you've seen the really important building blocks for not only this year but the future in guys like Charles Nelson, who's a Florida native. He's a speedster wide receiver, punt returner. He's been a really good wide receiver the last month. Royce Freeman, true freshman, a 1,000-yard rushing season. These guys have only picked up confidence. And so I don't think they're going to look at Florida State and be scared like an Oregon team might have been 5-10 years ago when they were kind of on the rise. Or I think Oregon firmly sees itself as being part of that, whatever you want to call it, elite class or something like that. But they really believe that this is where they belong, and so I just don't think that they are gonna back down. The defense, I think, is gonna rise to the occasion. Maybe not play their cleanest game, but I do think they have more game than we're giving them credit for.
And I would argue from Florida State's end that they can win this game and maybe have as much confidence as anyone in the country. They've won 29 in a row, 26th in a row with Jameis Winston at quarterback, have been in a lot of situations. I think last year going to the national championship game, the question was, can Florida State win a big game? They beat everybody. They won games last year by an average of 40 points. So people wanted to know, if they get in a shootout or they get in a close game, how will they respond? And they obviously responded by, winning a national championship. I think this season they've made it very clear that they can play close games and find a way to win. And so I think that'll be a key for Florida State. And then I think also just the pro-style offense. I don't think that Oregon's defense has seen a ton of offenses that look like Florida State's offense. I think, Jameis Winston, and you have a guy like Jameis Winston running it, who can really, he can be looking one way. He can still, he truly has, maybe 5 options to either check the ball down to a running back or throw a ball to a wide receiver, and he's not afraid. Part of the 17 interceptions is he's not afraid to make the most and spread the ball around and make some big plays. So I think just Oregon kind of being a defense that drops 8, tries to rush 3, and Florida State having all the options with their improved running game. I think that'll be a key for Florida State if they're going to win this game and move on to the championship game. Speaking of the championship game, obviously, I'm sure all 4 of the coaches that we've talked to have talked about the challenge of, at this point in the season, it's not just this season, put it all out there, lay it all on the line because, this is for a championship. This is obviously the playoffs, and so they have to, after this game, prepare to play another one a week later. Drew, is Alabama built for that? In your opinion? I mean, built to kind of, do you feel like they can, if they're able to get by Ohio State, do you feel like they have what it takes or what makes them a strong team to win it all?
If they can come out of this game injury-free, I think that's probably the case for all the teams there. They did lose Kenyon Drake to a broken leg back in about week 4 or 5, and they've had some guys miss a couple games with injuries, and even, Cam Robbins is kind of having to battle ankle and leg injuries at the left tackle. So, it's just kind of like there's a lot of depth in this team that you look, especially at the defensive line. You got guys like 5-star recruits like Deshaun Hand, who's barely even cracking the rotation. So, it seems like it's a pretty deep Alabama team that's gotten a lot better as the season's gone along. So, I do think if they won on January 1st, they'd have plenty of time to get rested and reconfigured for a game on January 12th.
And, I mean, Drew, or Ari, or Andrew, did either one of you guys have anything that any of the coaches have said to you guys about the challenge of trying to pick yourself back up and prepare for this next game?
Yeah, Oregon's got this thing where, like, I'm sure all these coaches have the similar mindset. They try to teach their players, but they say, flush it. Basically, no matter how good or bad the game was, you got to flush it and get ready 24 hours later. I think that so mentally, I think Oregon would be fine, but again, physically, with more injuries, happening recently, I just think that would be the biggest challenge, especially no matter who they play. If they were to win, Ohio State, Alabama, those are teams with, top-notch elite talent and depth. And Oregon has that talent, but the depth right now just isn't there in some ways. So that's where I think it would be the biggest challenge for Oregon is, your frontline guys could do it. 11 days after you play a semifinal, but are your backups going to be ready to face the challenge?
Well, I think the most interesting thing that you have to keep in mind when talking about the college football playoff and what you have to do in order to win is that everybody's going to be going through it for the first time. I mean, it's pretty crazy to think, but a few years ago, even Ohio State, to get to the national championship, all they had to do was win the Big Ten. They didn't have to play a Big Ten championship game, and they could have played for a national title. Now anybody who's going to win this championship is, more often than not, going to have to go one loss or put together a great resume during the regular season, win their conference championship game, win a playoff game to win the national title game. And I don't think we've seen how anybody in this country obviously is going to react to that, given that this is the first time we're going through it. So I think that there's a lot of strain and a lot of things that need to be taking place, especially when you look at what Ohio State's done. They have to prepare for Michigan, then the Big Ten championship game, then win 2 more games. That's 4 games basically that they would have even had to play 3 years ago to win the championship. So in terms of depth, I think that's the most important thing, staying healthy and making sure that you have the players and the mindset to be successful in that situation. But I think it's going to be a very tough thing for all 4 teams to do, and the good news for all 4 teams is that everybody's going to have to do it.
And just a reminder for anyone watching that you can ask us questions on the right side of your screen, or you can, any of the pages that you clicked on the link from, on cleveland.com, al.com, or oregonlive.com. You can comment in the comment section. I'll look at those and ask some questions. Before we get to the questions, let's go with a matchup that you guys are excited to watch from the Rose Bowl and then the Sugar Bowl. And we'll start with let's mix it up. Let's start with you, Andrew.
I want to see how Oregon defends Nick O'Leary, because Oregon had a really good tight end itself for this year until early November when Farrell Brown had a massive leg injury and got hurt. So they know what a good tight end looks like in practice. But I think O'Leary's a whole different beast, and I'm really interested to see kind of how they mix it up to defend him. On the corner with a guy like Rashad Green, they're going to have an answer. Probably put a guy like Troy Hill on him. But Oregon's linebacking and the pass coverage, I don't want to say suspect. It's just been, up in the air sometimes. I'm not quite sure who they would put on him. And so do you put a bigger safety? They have a guy like Tyree Robinson, who's a 6'4" safety, but he's a redshirt freshman. Do you want that matchup with the savvy veteran? Or do you go with kind of the middle linebacker who has a little bit of pass coverage in Derek Malone? That's just something that I think is a mismatch in many ways, because O'Leary is a really good, really talented tight end.
Yeah, and I think it's easy for the Oregon-Florida State game to say that you want to see the secondary, for Oregon's defense. Their secondary, obviously you don't have EFO anymore, has been the highlight and the best part of their defense. So I think it's easy to say that you want to see Oregon secondary against, Florida State's passing game. But I'm actually going to go the opposite way and say that Jalen Ramsey, Florida State's versatile defensive back, has been talking a lot of, I wouldn't even say trash. He's just a bold player. And, when he makes statements, they're interesting. They're quotable, very quotable. And, he said that that Oregon's, wide receivers, that he's going to, talk a little trash to them and get to them in that way, and that, the challenge of, going up against their secondary, and they feel like they're the best secondary. And so I'm curious, just with this Oregon offense and its ability to both, run and I think in some ways similar to Florida State, the way they go about it is, they can mix it up. They both have a, a good passing game and a run game. I think Jalen Ramsey playing that star role, I think he's going to get a lot of attention and action. And for a guy that's been talking a lot, he said he still believes that Jameis Winston's the best player. He doesn't, so practicing against Marcus Mariota, or playing against Marcus Mariota, he said is nothing he's looking forward to, because he plays against the best player in the country every day at practice. So I'm curious to see how Jalen Ramsey, in a big role, I think, to stop this Oregon offense does. And we will move on to the Sugar Bowl matchup. Ari, what's the matchup that you're looking most forward to in this game?
Well, Drew kind of mentioned it already, but how is Ohio State going to slow down Amari Cooper, who I believe might be the best player in college football? I mean, just from a pure dominance standpoint. There's two. And then how is Ohio State going to protect its youthful quarterback against a team that has the defensive talent to make it really hard on him? So the question really is, A, can Ohio State in the secondary with Doran Grant, their senior cornerback, contain Amari Cooper? It'd almost be like a victory for Ohio State if they could hold him to 8 receptions for 80 yards instead of it being some crazy 12-reception, 140-yard, 2-touchdown game. But secondly, I think the most important thing is, can Ohio State win with a quarterback that hasn't proven really that he can make plays consistently? And I'm not taking anything away from his performance, Cardale Jones' performance in the Big Ten championship game, but Ohio State was so in control of that game for so long that after he threw that lob that Devin Smith, a high jumper, went up to catch, it kind of took the pressure off a little bit. If the game is 17-14 in the fourth quarter and Cardale Jones has to make a play, can he do it? And I know that's not a specific matchup in terms of personnel, but really, I'm not sure that Ohio State has proven that its quarterback can make the plays that it needs to win to win in a game of this magnitude. So those are the two things I'm really looking forward to seeing.
How about you, Drew?
That's kind of the same way. I think Amari Cooper's probably going to get his, whether getting his numbers means 8 for 80 yards and a touchdown or some crazy number. I think he's going to be a factor in the game regardless. But yeah, I'm also wondering, how is this matchup between Cardale Jones and the Alabama defense? How is he going to get affected by the Alabama defense? Is he going to be able to hit a big play early that gets his confidence rolling, or is he going to get knocked around early and have a key turnover early and it would be something that would get Alabama rolling? And also, they got up to such a big start against Wisconsin. What's it going to be like in the third quarter if it's a close game? Is he going to be able to make that play? So, I think a lot of what Alabama's able to do against Cardale Jones, if they're able to trick him or pressure him or anything like that, I think it's going to be the biggest factor in this game.
And I don't mean to interrupt, Drew, but I feel like there's a lot of people who say that, hey, it's an advantage that Ohio State doesn't have any film on. It's not an advantage. The guy hasn't played. There's no advantage. You think Nick Saban is sitting in his office rocking back and forth in his chair saying, we don't have enough film on this guy. How are we possibly going to defend them? You know what they're going to do? They're going to blitz them. They're going to pressure them. They're going to knock them down. They're going to make Ohio State's offense in the run game a lot harder to move. And they're going to try to make Cardale Jones be in a position to have to make a play. It's not rocket science. There's no film because he wasn't good enough to get onto the field because there weren't injuries. So that's the biggest problem Ohio State has. It's not an advantage for Ohio State that they're on their third quarterback. It's a disadvantage, and whether or not they can compete with Alabama is based on whether this person with no experience can play well enough in the biggest game of his career and the biggest game of the Urban Meyer era.
Yeah, Al Carter, do you think if Alabama brings the pressure, is Cardale Jones a guy that can escape it and make a play? You hear he's got a big arm, but is he a guy that can make a play with his legs and create some space and then make the big play with his arm? Does he have that kind of speed?
He's a very big, athletic guy, and he's at Ohio State for a reason. But I think that Alabama is talented and is deep enough to make him look like a third-string quarterback. I think that's Ohio State's biggest fear is that Alabama is going to pressure him, ruffle his feathers a little bit, and things are going to be really hard for Ohio State to get things going offensively. So what I think they need to do is they need to get the running game going. They have to have some of these jet sweeps, these screens, some things to get Ohio State moving the chains a little bit, because it's not going to be like the Wisconsin game where he threw a ball into double coverage almost, and Devin Smith jumped up over 2 Wisconsin defenders and made the catch. Those aren't Alabama quarterbacks in that Big Ten championship game. I know Wisconsin's a very good team, but they did it against a team that's supremely less talented than Alabama and severely less good. So can I answer the question of whether or not I think Cardale Jones is good enough to change the game on his own? I personally don't think that he is that player. But I do think Ohio State has enough offensive weapons around him to make things interesting enough where it's a game in the third quarter. I just don't think Cardale Jones is going to throw for 4 touchdowns and no interceptions in this game and be the reason why Ohio State beats Alabama.
All right, you interrupt whenever you need to interrupt, okay?
I appreciate it.
We'll let Ari cool down over there. Andrew, we'll ask you, I'll have this question for you. This is from Oregon Live. What is the comparison of Oregon tight ends and FSU defensive ends? I think tight ends will be vital to winning that game, both in blocking and on runs, outlet passes over the middle. So, I mean, I kind of touched on it a little bit as far as no, actually, I'm looking at another question. So, yeah, you kind of touched on it, talking about Oregon's tight ends, but just how would you compare them to, I guess, the defensive ends, the Mario Edwards of the world, and some of the guys Florida State has?
I think you'd be the best at kind of giving us the point of view from the Florida State perspective, but from Oregon, I mean, without Farrell Brown, he was a really good blocker. He's about 6'5", 250, is becoming a really good receiver, kind of a safety valve for Marcus Mariota. Whenever he get in trouble, he just lob it up, and Farrell Brown will go get it. Without him, they're left with 2 guys who have differing skill sets, and neither one of them, even to combine, I don't think they quite make up for Farrell Brown's absence. And you have Johnny Munt, who's a sophomore, who's more of a receiver, and then you have Evan Bayless, who's more of a blocker, but has gotten involved in the passing game too. And I think if you have an aggressive defensive end, it's going to cause problems potentially for Bayless or a Munn, just in the blocking game. Blocking has been something they've really been working with Munn for a long time. Bayless, again, is better. He's a bigger body, but I don't think he's quite as consistent as Farrell Brown was blocking. So I just don't think it's a great matchup for Oregon. If you're going to have people bringing pressure, Oregon does have a lot of good outlets they can go to, not just a tight end, a wide receiver or a back or two backs coming out of the backfield for routes. They've done that many times. They've mixed up who lines up next to Mariota. But you still want those guys to be active, the tight ends of the world, and if you're going to have to keep them in to protect along the edge, obviously that limits what Oregon can do. I mean, I don't quite know what Mario Edwards, kind of what his skill set is. Is he going to be a guy who's comfortable dropping into coverage if he needs to? Oregon's defensive ends do that quite often in their 3-4 scheme, but I just don't think it's on the surface a terrific Oregon matchup.
Yeah, no, definitely. And Mario Edwards is definitely the best of the defensive ends for Florida State. He's a big body, 6'3", about 290, and has good speed for a guy that size. The way that Florida State's scheme is, you don't have, they're not necessarily coming off the edge. He's as good as setting the edge as any of Florida State's defensive ends, or as maybe any defensive end in the country. He played a huge role in the national championship game, and maybe his best game of his career against Auburn last year. And I think it's a similar matchup for him, and kind of speaks to him having another big game. I think throughout this season, Florida State has had young guys where they kind of have packages where if they do want to, be blitz heavy off the edge, they have a guy like, true freshman Lorenzo Featherston, who's 6'7", 220, who isn't going to, set the edge like Amari Edwards does, but is going to be able to, get after your quarterback and make some plays. And so I think that it's an intriguing matchup. And I think that, Mario Edwards will be, if Florida State's going to have success, people are going to be talking about, Mario Edwards' play and how he did match up against this Oregon offense, particularly, its tight ends.
And that's something too.
Yeah,
sorry to interrupt real quick, but that the tackles, early in the season, Oregon were the huge problem because they lost 3 starting tackles in a matter of about 3 weeks. Those guys, for the exception of one, Tyler Johnson, who's an All-American who's out for the year, they're all back, and they look to be playing pretty well, and they're healthy. And so I don't think the concern so much is about the edge anymore. They have good depth there. They've got experience. So maybe that does mean that Oregon can let its tight ends kind of roam a little free and give those defensive ends for Florida State basically an extra responsibility, not make them just a bull rush to the quarterback.
Yeah, no, it'll definitely be an interesting matchup because they don't necessarily. I think Mario Edwards is the most complete defensive end you have, but he's not that. He's not going to be flying off the edge. He is going to be as big a defensive end as you'll see. For you guys on the Sugar Bowl side, we have a question. Which defensive line, Tides or Bucks? And then that says the biggest in pounds. I don't know if we're going to go through the rosters and look at weights, but who do you think has the better defensive line? We'll start with Drew.
I admittedly don't know enough about Ohio State's to say. I know Joey Bosa's really good, and I'm sure Urban's stockpiled some talent there. Just what I know about Alabama is they're pretty deep. When they run the 3-4, they've got they're probably at least 2 deep at every position. Jaron Reed, the JUCO transfer, has been really good this year, and they can bring in a guy like DJ Petway to pass rush. Ashawn Robinson can play inside or out. Brandon Ivory's been a pretty solid, stopgap as the nose when he's been called upon to play. And then Jonathan Allen's been pretty steady as a sophomore. He was a 5-star recruit out of high school. And then you got a guy like Deshaun Hand, who was a 5-star recruit and one of the top prospects in the country last year. Can't even get on the field unless it's kind of like garbage time. So I don't know enough about Ohio State to say which one's better. I think Alabama's got a pretty deep and a pretty good group going into the game.
Okay, and Ari, did you have? Okay, sorry, my computer showed you were missing. Did you have anything as far as the defensive lines? I don't know how much you know about the Crimson Tide's defensive line, but if you had to build your perfect team with the defensive line and you had to pick just from those two, who'd you take?
I think it's interesting because I think that Ohio State has the best linemen on the defensive line in the game, but I think Alabama has more depth, more speed, and more talent across the board. Now, Ohio State's nose tackle Michael Bennett's a really good player, and they've got a lot going for them across the board. But Ohio State's defensive line was supposed to be the best one in the country earlier on in the year, but they lost Noah Spence, who was another five-star guy that was supposed to be a bookend with Joey Bosa when he got suspended for drugs. Right now I think that Joey Bosa has impacted every single game that Ohio State's played in. He's caused turnovers, he's scored touchdowns, he's forced turnovers that turn into touchdowns. And really, for being only a sophomore, he might be the best prospect for the NFL in the country right now that is pretty NFL ready. When you have a defensive playmaker that could impact the game the way he does, I think that that's a very big tool. But it's kind of hard to pick which one you would rather have because I think Alabama across the board probably has more guys that are really good than Ohio State.
Okay, and our next question is Arizona had a unique defensive formation that gave the Oregon offense fits. Do you think Florida State's, quote, star scheme with Ramsey as the roamer presents the same problem, or will Oregon exploit the seams and force FSU into another coverage? And I can answer that one. I spoke about it a little bit earlier. I mean, that's essentially Florida State's base defense, and it's all about getting the best players on the field. And I think when they're in that star scheme, they have their best players on the field. And so I would be really surprised to see, that Oregon offense force them into some other defensive scheme just because, Ramsey is a guy that's, he's, for example, that Georgia Tech game, he essentially was playing linebacker just because they didn't throw the ball. And he's a guy that's, long enough, fast enough to really play wherever he's needed and, to make up speed, if he has to play like a linebacker role and is, behind. So I think that I think it's going to be a challenge for Oregon's offense, honestly, and I think that, Ramsey is going to be a huge part of that challenge for them.
Just as a quick primer for people listening, I mean, Arizona, the question is referencing, they ran a 3-3-5 stack, and a lot of defenses kind of start out in a 3-3 and then morph into a 3-4, or they drop a linebacker down line scrimmage. But Arizona's challenge was they really did keep the 3 down linemen and 3 linebackers in their spot and would kind of disguise where they're coming from each time. Does Florida State, do they shift a lot, or do they pretty much stay? I mean, are they going to, up until the very snap, are they going to let guys hold their spot to make it harder to guess where they're coming from?
Yeah, they do. They do a lot of, they're very multiple. I think there's multiple, just from what I've seen, there's multiple, do as many things on defense as any defense that Oregon's really faced. I was trying to look for a defense that I can kind of compare them to. I think Stanford did some things on defense that were a little bit multiple, but I think that, yeah, they shift a lot, they move around a lot. I think the reason that they like having Ramsey in that star role is because at the last second he can adjust, and his closing speed is probably as good as anyone in college football. Predictions for the Rose Bowl and the Sugar Bowl, and then we will say goodbye to all of our loyal, awesome people that tuned in today's chat. We'll start with you, Ari. Who do you have winning the Sugar Bowl? Who do you have winning the Rose Bowl, and what are your scores?
I think Alabama wins the Sugar Bowl. I don't know if they're going to cover the spread, but I'll say 34-24. So if it's 9.5 or 10, that's a pretty good number. And I think that Oregon's going to take care of Florida State. Oregon is just a very high-powered team that seems to be playing. I think it might be hard for them to win the national championship because of depth issues that we just discussed. But I think that I'll give them 41-30. That sounds like a pretty solid number too.
Drew, do you want to add your prediction to that for both games?
Yeah, I think Alabama's going to. I'd say they're going to be. Yeah, I think they're going to beat Ohio State. Maybe like by 17, but I don't think it's going to be like a blowout 17. It's going to be where Alabama scores a couple of touchdowns in the fourth quarter to pull away. I don't know. I don't really know a score. Maybe like a 38-21 type game. I should. Florida State hasn't lost in forever, so it's hard to pick against them. But I think Oregon's finally going to be the one that takes them off the perch in the Rose Bowl. And I can see another high-scoring game, like a 44-38 type game there, where there's going to be a lot of crazy stuff happening in the Rose Bowl. I think I don't think there will be as much crazy stuff happening in the Sugar Bowl, but you never know. That's why they play the games.
Andrew, your predictions?
I'll jump on kind of both those trains. I think Alabama's going to beat Ohio State. Like Ari said, the spread's about 10. I think they cover that. I just really like Amari Cooper. The kind of the long-standing joke about Ohio State is, can they match the SEC speed? I guess we'll find out again. But I think Amari Cooper's going to have a big day. I think they win probably by about 10. I'll go 38-28 on that one. And I think Oregon wins as well. I just think Florida State's a little too inconsistent, a little too up and down, and Oregon's kind of been like cutting through people like a saw the last 8 weeks, really. I mean, winning by at least 3 touchdowns every game. So I'll pick them to go 42-35.
Are we chalk so far? Like everybody picked Oregon and Alabama so far? Yes.
Yeah.
Which makes you think that it means that there's a chance that everyone's going to be wrong.
Yeah. Well, no. Like I'm not going chalk, guys. I like to mix it up. I am going to go. I think Alabama wins the Sugar Bowl. I don't feel like they cover. I am curious to see the mystery of, I think I've a little bit talked about, maybe Ohio State has a bigger offensive half in the first half because of, not having stuff on film. And I know Ari is completely against that and thinks that he'll be on the ground the first half. But I do think that Ohio State's going to score some points in the second half or in the first half. That Alabama will make some adjustments and come out in the second half and win. I don't think they'll cover. I think it'll be about 37-34 Alabama. In the Rose Bowl, I think I do have Florida State winning the game. I think just having been there to watch Florida State win 29 in a row. And being on deadline and feeling like, hey, okay, well, they're going to lose this one, or, the streak finally ended. I don't know how many times you can write that. I guess until I see it, it's hard for me to believe it just because it's screwed with my deadline so much that I'm just going to say they win. I do think it's going to be a shootout. I have Florida State winning the game 48-44. Down to the wire, like every Florida State game has seemed to be this season. I think with that, I think we're done. Unless Ari do you have any more hot takes or anything for us?
No, I'm good.
I'm sorry. I'll stop picking on you. Thank you to everyone who joined our chat today. Stay tuned, obviously, to AL.com, Oregon Live, and Cleveland.com for all the coverage leading into the New Year's Day's Final Four Bowls, and we will be there on site and have you covered throughout.
Thank you.